Everyone can see in here.
Well, you were the other panelist. Oh, there you are.
Hi. Welcome to Raising Dion Life Lessons for the American Sci-Fi and Fantasy track for Virtual Dragon Con 2020. My name is Morgan A. McLaughlin McFarland. I own Salt Circle Games. We produce materials for Chill 3rd Edition. And I'm going to go around and let my fellow panelists introduce themselves. Yvonne, did you want to start us off?
Sure. Hi, I'm Yvonne McDowell. I am a professor of media and pop culture. I also run a podcast called Anxiety, two anxious Black attorneys talking about pop culture. And so, yeah, that's me.
Andy?
Hi, I'm Andrea La Rosa Jimenez. No relation to Esperanza Jimenez, unfortunately, but yeah, I've been this is going to be 16th Dragon Con. I've been going to Dragon Con for a really long time, and I've been on a bunch of panels. And I'm a big comic book and horror nerd, so anything comic book media related, I'm usually happy to talk about. So I'm happy to be here.
Marcus?
I'm Marcus Haynes, also known as M. Haynes. I am an author, English professor, and lover of all things speculative and Black.
And we have Jessa?
Yes. So my name is Jessa. You can usually just search for Good to Be a Geek and you'll find me. I talk about all things pop culture, gaming, but also gender and race issues in pop culture.
And Kelly?
And I'm Kelly Harkins. I'm the director of the American Science Fiction Fantasy Media Track, and I teach at an entertainment school, and I've written for Jessa's site occasionally, and just generally a geek.
Well, so we're here today to talk about Raising Dion, which has been described by one of our panelists as being a hidden gem of Netflix. I assume everybody who is here today has seen it, but if not, hopefully this will encourage you to go watch the whole thing. At the center, at the heart of the show, is the relationship between a mother and her son as he is discovering superpowers. And so parenting a child who is different, parenting a child who has very, very special needs is, of course, one of the main topics that you see throughout the show. And I'd really love to get some feedback from the panelists about how you feel they represent that in the show, and your own experiences dealing with that issue, and how you feel about having them translated onto the screen.
I know we have a couple mothers here, so
definitely just jump right in.
Well, my son had a lot of medical issues when he was a little boy too. He's an adult now. He's actually a panelist for the anime and manga track now. But when he was little, he had a lot of special medical issues, and so for me that was a huge draw for the show. Is that on top of having this wonderful adaptation of a comic book, it just felt really realistic to me that she was so protective of him, and she humanized him in so many instances where a lot of people, even with good intentions, were willing to see him just as his powers, or just as a specimen, a human specimen, as Suzanne calls him in one of the later episodes, and that's, as a parent of children with special medical issues or diagnoses or what have you, it's often a fight to get people to see your child as a person that's more than a diagnosis, or more than this thing that makes him different, or needing extra help or support. And so for me that was the anchor for me, was the relationship between the mother and the child. And also I think that Alicia Wainwright does a wonderful job of being that very grounded presence in this incredibly wild show with like children that are godlike, and I think the show would not have worked as well had she not had that very, normal human being reaction to everything. So
no, it's such a relatable experience. I was a single mom of a child with autism, so I really could see a lot of her struggles with Dion as she's trying to first of all learn what is going on with my son. I know something is different about him than he used to be, but something is also different in him from other children. And how, on the one hand, of course, you love and embrace everything different about your child, but on the other hand, it's not the experience of parenting you signed up for. So you have to really change. You have to change your expectations, and you have to really start being quite firm with the rest of the world. When it comes to how they're going to interact with your kid.
Another issue, going off of that, raising my niece and my nephew both have ADHD and dyscalculia, and so raising a Black child who has a learning disability or any type of learning in school, they'd often get labeled as bad. And so being a parent and having to sort of stand up for your child, I thought the show did a really good job of that, where she didn't want Dion particularly to sort of fall through the cracks. She wanted to make sure that he was represented in a way and that he had someone to sort of stand up for him. He had a defender, he had an advocate, and I thought the show did a really good job of that as well.
Granted, I am not a parent, but I do teach, and a lot of times, granted, I am teaching adults, but I just had a student who was a parent, and he talked about his daughter who was diagnosed with diabetes type 2 when she was 2, and trying that shock and that trying to figure out how to do it and figure out how to make it work for her so that her life wasn't impacted overly. Really, it struck me when he was talking about it. I was like, wow, this feels like a much more real situation, granted, but you could see that in a lot of what she was doing and trying to figure out how to find answers and, deal with it all. And I like you brought up, I think her performance was just incredible on that, finding her own way as well as a way for Dion.
Because you want your kid to feel normal, but you also don't want to shove them into a box that they don't fit in.
But I really enjoyed how she got to be a really complex character. So you do get to see her struggle with, there is that inherent fear of, my kid is so super powered. There's nothing that could potentially stop him, but then still maintain that compassion that she has to and recognize that, yes, he's still in a vulnerable place as a child. He doesn't understand. He's not going to understand how the world is going to see him. So how do you balance that? I don't want him to feel shame or fear about what he is or what he can do, but still we've got to temper that with, we need to figure out a way to manage that so that the rest of the world doesn't have that knee-jerk reaction.
And Yvonne, you specifically mentioned your Black children being the fear of being labeled as bad, as opposed to, oh, this is a child with special needs. And I think we see some very specific scenes of that, especially when dealing with the administrator in the school and his response to things that happen either because of or surrounding Dion. So I would really love to hear some feedback on that experience specifically. The experience of how an administrator looks at this child, this sweet, big-eyed, tiny little child, and immediately labels him an aggressor.
Statistically, that's true. And actually, by the time, 7 to me is a whole baby. That's a baby, it's to me, but a lot of people don't think that way. A lot of people, especially with Black children and minority children, but specifically with Black children, especially with Black boys, they tend to be perceived as much older than they really are by school administrators. And you see behavior that is coddled and or excused and or labeled with appropriate needs for support in white children and white students, young students especially. They get pathologized in Black students, and they're labeled like hyper or bad or, and this is something that gets internalized as well. And so it just, other people can speak to this better than I can, but I've read a lot about how, and I saw this actually in my own school as well, where all of the, remedial classes and the kids with the classes, they were always the Black and Hispanic kids, and the ones that acted out in the same way that were more affluent and white students, they were, gifted, or, maybe they had something going on at home, or there was all kinds of excuses made for the exact type of behavior. And I think the show draws that really well.
I don't know if Yvonne, I think you were gonna respond. I don't want to jump.
So sorry.
I was just going to say, I actually lost my train of thought. I was going to say, but that is actually correct. You sort of, both as someone who's sort of seen that happen directly, right? We had to sort of put my niece into an environment where she could sort of excel because they don't know what to do with her. And so you have to sort of make sure that you're the parent who's stressing, this is what my child needs. I'm going to stand up for them in this particular way, or else that does happen. And I teach at the college level, and I teach at a school, at a university that's majority minority. So a lot of my students, when they come, they have to start off they come with having to start off in courses because they haven't had someone stand up for them in that way. So they're already behind, even though they've made it to college. So if you don't start that early, you end up with students who sort of may get to college, but they aren't prepared for it because they haven't been given that. They've been labeled in such a way at such a young age.
Right. And I think one of the things that I really enjoy that the show does is it marries that idea of, having to deal with a superpowered child with this idea of having to deal with a Black child. And I think that both of those elements really come together nicely in those scenes where we see Dion in the administration of the school. Because already, just by virtue of him being a young Black child, he's seen as dangerous. He's seen automatically, like you said, as the aggressor. The blame is automatically put on him as being the one who started this altercation. And then this is sort of exacerbated by the fact that they can't figure out how he started the altercation. So, with also combining the fact that he has these abilities that I think even raises this sort of that fear of Black bodies, Black people even higher. So I think the show did a good job of sort of like introducing that kind of weird kind of connection between the two things. And I think because it is renewed, when it continues, I would like to see, kind of more of how that sort of takes place in Dion's life.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that too.
And I really appreciate that they even brought in the race situation in the first place, because they very easily could have just skipped right over it. I mean, it's set in Atlanta. That's enough, sort of urban atmosphere to get along with it. All right, Michael B. Jordan's your dad. Okay, great. But we could have just completely washed over the whole race issue. But the way that they are able to introduce it through that situation with the administrator is so brilliantly done. And that she has to then have that conversation of, is he too young to have the conversation of what does it mean to be a Black boy growing up in this world? And it's a very real life situation. So even if you can't get around the superhero conversation, you very much can relate to having to have that race conversation.
And as a struggle that as a struggle that white parents don't have to deal with, I think that it's important. It was important for me as a viewer, and I think it's important to other white viewers that they see this happen. And ideally, you would just believe it when people tell you that this happens. But we know that that's not the case. We know people need to see metaphor. They need to see it in fiction to really internalize it. And so for me, I felt that it was such a valuable way to present it to an audience who might want to understand, but just don't have the context to understand what that experience
putting Nicole as the point of view character really worked really well in that regard, because it's really, he is too young. 7 is too young to have these conversations about awful people and, systemic injustice. I mean, he's so little. Like, that's what I kept thinking. He is so little. And one of the things that I really liked about the way the show is directed is they allowed Josiah to have, the actor who plays Dion, to improvise. You can see that he's just a very normal 7-year-old little boy. And I mean, when you put Nicole as the point of view character, to really ground the series together, you really feel her sense of injustice of having to burden this little baby with, the realization that he is going to be treated unjustly for no good reason. You really empathize. I think that's really powerful to have shown that, to see how I don't want to have this conversation. This is a little kid. So I thought that was a really powerful scene.
Yeah, I think a lot of her struggles, to me, she is very much the central character because, with her struggling with jobs and wanting to express her art, but yet not being able to because you have to pay the bills and, all those things that, and dealing with the loss of her husband. And although, there's so much there, she really is that point. And, how do you say things? How do you connect? How do you explain? How do you support? And, again, like I said earlier, that whole journey is seeing her kind of come into that, understanding. And and the betrayal at the end. Of course, it's been long enough that spoilers are okay. But I think, and we're gonna, if we get that second season, hopefully, like you said, when we'll kind of see the repercussions of that. So
Yeah, and her guilt as she realizes that sometimes she's afraid of her own child. And I think, any of you who have raised children who have reached the age where now they're as big as you get to that point where you realize you're having an argument, and if they throw a tantrum now, there's nothing I can do to stop them. They are bigger than me or stronger than me. And then feeling guilty because you do have that element of fear. And I think she does such a nuanced job of showing us, I love him, but he scares me. But does it make me a terrible mother that I'm afraid of my kid? And I also don't want the rest of the world to be afraid of him.
Yeah, I didn't get that. I didn't get that from, I have to be honest, I didn't get fear of him. I got a lot of fear for him, and the realization that he is a child who has basically godlike powers that put him in danger in all kinds of, and make him now explicitly toward the end of the season, make him a target of the crooked man and, and Biona. I didn't get that. I didn't get that she was afraid of him. Dion is such a good boy. He's such a good kid. He's not,
Yeah. The moment when the toys embedded in the wall, though,
where he can't.
I think was a moment. To me, like the look I saw on her face was that moment of, okay, no, she just got real.
I mean, we've seen some of this because, of course, the X-Men have played with this kind of metaphor. With that parents not knowing what to do, being perhaps a little concerned or afraid, but and as a minimized person. But of course, this kind of morphs it in and brings it into play in a very relatable way, because of course it's hard for us to necessarily relate to the X-Men, but we can relate to the situation we see much better.
Yeah.
And I think
no, please, Marcus, go ahead.
I would say, I was just thinking, and something just came to mind, because I think that if we ought to get, and I do think we are kind of supposed to get that, there's a bit of fear of Dion from that moment. If we are to get that, I could see it just as paralleling to a parent, so feelings that they don't know their child anymore. Like, I'm scared because I don't know who you are anymore. Like, I raised you up to this point, and I don't know who you are. Like, I don't know what you're capable of. I don't know who you are. I don't know what you're going to do. So I think that we can easily kind of relate this situation to that sort of feeling, and that's a very real feeling, for a lot of parents as they see their child grow up. They start to see things that they never expected them to be able to do or to do. And I think that kind of puts them in a state of fear. So that's probably just another way that we can kind of really relate to sort of the struggles that go on in the show.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the character Esperanza, because I feel you're dealing with two characters who do have special needs, who are othered by the children in their school, who have kind of sought each other out, maybe a little bit more on Esperanza's side, and how they both really have these arcs through the series of the show of, I'm different, I'm okay with my difference. It's your job to learn how to accommodate my difference. It's not my job to stop being different. So if anyone would like to speak to that, I could talk about Esperanza all day. So
I love Esperanza. She's like my little superhero. I appreciate so much that everything about Esperanza is just her own self-confidence. She never once gives you the impression that she is not happy with who she is, with what her ability level is. And I think just that most powerful moment where, Dion thinks he's doing such a good thing by helping her to be able to get out of her chair. And she's like, absolutely not. Like, that is not right. That's not something that's appropriate. And we're not going to do that here. It's such a remarkably powerful moment. And of course, he doesn't understand, but then we get to sort of deal with that and sort of talk it out. But I mean, just everything, every moment. I mean, no matter how many times Dion wants to sort of dismiss her so he can play with the cool kids, and she just rolls with it. She's like, that's okay. He's my friend. I know he's my friend. And he's going to get there eventually. But just her own ability to be so confident in all of those moments is really just astounding for someone so small.
And to be such an advocate for her own autonomy, not just the things she can do, but of her body. Her chair is part of her. It is part of who she is, and it's not anybody else's place to take her out of that and take that away from her. And I think that the idea of bodily autonomy and individual autonomy is a thread that runs throughout the whole series.
I think it was really smart how they decided to approach that, because I don't think that many shows would have gone that route. I don't think many shows would have gone the route of saying that, Dion, what you did was not okay. And so I think it was very good that they sort of like really, really fleshed out Esperanza's character in that way. And I also think, going back to kind of something we touched on earlier about this idea of, raising children with special needs, I think that we have a really good example of sort of like a parallel of this through Dion and his abilities. And we have a real world example of this, of, how these two things come together. Much in the same way that we see, Dion's blackness and his superpowers coming together to paint a narrative, we see like the parallel special needs of Dion's abilities and Esperanza's actual special needs, so coming together to tell a more complete story.
And then it never holds her back. I mean, we never actually see her dad, but he's perfectly comfortable just letting her run about town with whoever.
He has a little cameo. It's her real dad, and he has a little tiny cameo in the birthday party. Actually,
and it's such a good lesson of trust for Nicole to be able to see, a parent can let their child, who is not like the other kids, still go and live a full life, and you don't have to hold their hand through every step. If they're going to be okay, if you do a good job with them and teach them to advocate for themselves and fight the fights that they can't fight, they're going to do okay with the rest of it.
For me, as a fan of comic book media, I thought it was really, really fantastic that I think the actress Sammy Haney, I think her name is, the little girl who plays Esperanza, is amazing. I mean, she's amazing, and she's actually an artist in real life, and she has her own T-shirt store. If you want to see her on Instagram, it's the funniest thing. I looked into the whole thing, and she's like 9, so she's like, she has this great gusto for just embracing new things in real life, and that really came off in Esperanza. But the really interesting is that the disease, the bone disease that she has in real life as well as on the show, is the same bone disease that Mr. Glass had in the Glass Split Unbreakable series. I'm a fan of that the movie series, the franchise. But in that franchise, in that series of movies, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Split and Unbreakable and Glass, but in that franchise, in that story, disability was often used as a metaphor for pathology, as for like moral pathology. So Mr. Glass, having grown up with this terrible disease that causes him so much chronic pain and limits the things that he wants to do, it really warps him as a person. Whereas here we do not, we see this presented in a completely new light. Just thought, I kept thinking about the two franchises together. It was just really, I really enjoyed seeing a different side to living with this really awful, disorder. Yeah, Esperanza does.
Yes, it does.
Leonardo.
So we've got a pretty great cast of characters, some good, some less than good. So let's talk a little bit about Pat. Did anybody, did you get creeper vibes from the very beginning? Were you surprised by some of the turns of events?
I didn't see it coming.
I got a smart.
Yvonne?
No, you go ahead.
I was just
so smart to cast.
We'll do Yvonne and Kelly.
All right. I was going to say, I think the show is smart to cast Ritter in the role, because you don't see him coming and think this guy's going to be a bad guy. He has the face of the nicest human being ever. And so to sort of see him take a turn, but you sort of saw it in the performance, right? He is sort of the quintessential nice guy, right? Like, you didn't pay any attention to me. You didn't do this for me. And so by playing the role of this guy who's, I'm a nice guy, I did everything you wanted, but not because I'm a good person, because I want you. I thought they turned that really well. And the casting of him helped that, because you see him and you want to believe he's a nice guy, but you can also sort of see that underneath the layer.
Looks like a human border collie. Like you don't look at a border
exactly.
collie and think, oh yeah, that's the one to watch.
Exactly.
So Kelly.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think casting him, who is the most typical, of the cast, and it's just perfect. And I definitely did not see it coming. I mean, he seemed a little desperate, and you could tell he was kind of like, his best buddies, like the charmer, the charismatic one, who's the one who everybody reacts to and relates to, and he struggles as the engineer rather than the genius. And I guess I should have, a la Glass and some of the, the people who are minimized are often the ones who turn villains, by turning that also on its head, that the person who ends up being minimized is not that. And then look what he turns into, the biggest, baddest guy who sucks the life and powers out of everybody. So.
And his sense of ownership over Dion and by extension Nicole, like it's not just, oh, I love you and you should be with me because I'm nice, but like, no, he's mine. I know better how to meet his needs than you do. He belongs to me. Was to me even worse than the nice guy, well, I put in favors and I should get out a relationship. It was the way that he acted about Dion and the way that he treated them both like they were property or a commodity that he was entitled to somehow.
Yeah.
Well, I thought he was a bad guy from the get-go. I thought he was like, I mean, there was all these little clues from the pilot. I was actually rewatching the series this weekend. There are all these little clues about how he is obviously a very intelligent person, obviously very talented in his own right. But instead of blossoming, he chose to, hitch his wagon to Mike, and just live in the shadow of someone who was more talented than him and just sort of fester in his envy and become this terrible person. And you really did see hints of that in little reaction shots of things that even Dion said to him about how he's the sidekick and all this other stuff. You really did see hints that he was a bad guy. What I didn't see coming was that he was the bad guy. I did not see that one coming.
And Marcus, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was kind of suspicious, but that was only really to the extent that I was, like a couple of other people have said, expecting him to be like, the nice guy, like, oh, I've done all these things, I deserve you now, and that sort of real, very common sense of entitlement or what have you. So I was expecting him to be annoying on that end, but I was not expecting him to be the big bad villain. But looking back, it does make some sense. Even just thinking about sort of like how he sort of dealt with the situation of Mark's death, and just sort of like a lot of his reactions to that. I think they sprinkled a few seeds throughout it, but not enough for the reveal to not be, whoa.
Yeah,
I saw that coming. Yeah,
I just thought it was just the creepy. I might have turned into a stalker, sort of nice guy. I totally saw that coming. And then when we realized that he was there for the event, I thought, well, all right, maybe he was just a little bit slower to develop some abilities. Maybe we just haven't seen that happen yet. But yeah, never saw the big bad coming.
I was super satisfied to find out, because I was afraid it was going to be the whole, nerdy guy finally mans up and gets the beautiful girl. And I was kind of relieved he turned out to be the bad guy and that it wasn't going to be a story where that kind of creeper behavior was rewarded.
Yeah.
Just too far, sir. Too far.
There were a couple almost
really good red herrings with Charlotte. I actually kind of suspected her for a bit. I was like, maybe she's, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Because she was the way she went to visit the Brayden, who I totally think is going to be seasons 2.
Oh yeah.
Big bad. Yeah. I totally think he's going to be the big bad, of season 2. But yeah, the way that she was just sort of like pretending to not care and then obviously very much care. I thought she was. If you had asked me like on the 6th episode who was the crooked man, and I was like, that's perfect. She's not even like a man. That's a perfect red herring.
Yeah.
So they fooled me.
Yeah. I mean, I think there would have been a twist, but for me, I completely, fully expected Charlotte to be like that reluctant mentor. Like
Yeah.
I don't want to be the surly old elder who just like, I don't want to deal with kids. Get off my lawn, and then falls like deeply in love with the child and just wants to protect it from all harm.
Which, to be fair, he is like the sweetest little dumpling, like of a child. How would you not love that child? Anytime anybody in the show reacts to him with any kind of hostility, it's like, have you seen him? He's so precious. He's so cute, and he did such a good job in the role too. He like such a mix of like that genuine innocence and curiosity, but also just the seriousness that. When you have a child with a special ability, a highly gifted child, a child who is both highly gifted and can move things with his mind, I think that he does sometimes see himself as, oh no, I have a duty to be a hero now, and that that's kind of a big burden for a child to take on himself. But I think it shows what a good-hearted person he is. That's his first inclination of what to do with this power is like, yeah, I'm going to go out and I'm going to fight crime and be a hero.
I love the wonder he had at it. It wasn't just, he's like, oh, look at me flying the cereal around. And, and as the abilities expanded and it was just, between some of the shock value, he really did. To me, he very much showed that childlike wonder with discovering these new things. It wasn't terrifying to him so much.
No.
Which to a kid, that makes sense. They just accept the world the way, oh yeah, it's the way it is. So, and then we see the reaction of everybody else to those. So he was great in that. Absolutely.
Okay. So, I think that, I don't know. I'm kind of at a loss now. I feel there's so much to discuss in the show. I feel a little bit overwhelmed about which direction we should take the discussion at this point, because you have the different timelines you're jumping between, because you're looking back at what happened with Mark in the past, and with the star shower and getting the powers, and the present day, and realizing how outside of the loop he had to keep Nicole by necessity to protect her, and what that feels like for her to find out after the fact. Not only have I lost the man that I love, but he was keeping this from me. There was something that he knew that that he didn't share with me. So I think that there's a really strong feeling of betrayal that happens between many different sets of characters throughout the show. Characters being betrayed by each other, or betrayed by their own bad choices.
I along those lines, I like the relationship between Nicole and her sister a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That was, it was, kind of competitive, which siblings often can get. One goes the whole doctor, I'm going to overachieve route, and the other one goes the artistic, creative route, and isn't quite approved of by her sister. But yet, it's like, well, yeah, I love you, but you're kind of a slacker, get together, or, all that kind of thing. So I love some of that dynamic was so powerful. And the fact that she's trying to convince her sister that this is happening. And it's like, you're crazy. Something's going wrong. Maybe the kid's sick. And then, of course, when he actually gets sick, that dealing with that whole thing was...
Nicole does end up with such a wonderful, wide support system. This kind of, most superhero stories, I think, deal with the idea of a found family. And Nicole very much has a found family that comes from some unusual places. She has, her actual biological family and her sister, but she also has friends. She has Dion's friends. She has her neighbor, Tessa, who steps up for her on multiple occasions. And I love Tessa. I mean, just like how wonderful, and again, like having had that experience, as a young single mom with a young child who had special needs, who was, we weren't sure what was going on with him. We didn't know. And, knowing that you had people like that I could have people like that in my life to support me through that. And I think that she's gone for so long where Pat has really been her only real sort of emotional support, and to see her blossoming and meeting new people and making new connections, partially in response to the changes that Dion is going through, was to me extremely rewarding. She gets such a wonderful character arc in this show. And moms don't get given great character arcs in a lot of stories.
Yeah, the show has a lot of love for single mothers, specifically Black single mothers, and it was directed. A couple of the episodes were directed by Black single mothers, so I think that makes a huge difference to have that perspective at the helm of the show. For me, it was I was also a single parent of a child with medical issues when he was little, and it was wonderful to see all these people step up. But at the same time, it really underscores that for people in Nicole's situation, who she's widowed and she's economically disadvantaged, and she was not expecting to have to go out into the workforce and be this the main breadwinner and also the only parent to her child. And she, they give her a lot of really good scenes where she gets to mourn on her own. But the fact that she does have to mourn on her own, she really has to cobble and patchwork the support system for herself among her neighbor, who's wonderful and who's been there herself. And they have a nice little moment, in the show where she says, "How come you're being so nice to me? You don't know me." And Tessa says, "I do know you. I've been there." I thought that was such a great moment. But it's just, in a way, it's wonderful that people do. I mean, that's reality, right? When you need people, people will step up. But it also just speaks to the fact that there are millions of women who find themselves in her shoes, and they do have to really, really fight very hard to struggle to patch together a support system, because there isn't one inherently in their communities or in their societies. And you're really expected to do, 35 different jobs at a time, and she doesn't even have time to mourn. She has to go off by herself at 3 a.m. to cry. She has no time. So I thought it was very bittersweet for me to watch her put that support system together.
Well, and the standards are so high for her. The bar that she has to reach in order to prove that she's being a good enough mother is just higher than is set for other parents in that situation. Because, if she were a white single mom, there would not be the same kind of exacting standards in that situation. We can get away with stuff. We can get away with stuff. We get passes on things. We get passes on mistakes that Black mothers, that mothers of color do not get. And the injustice of that she's having to not only deal with, the very real day-to-day lives of it, but the fact that there's always that degree of fear of, I have to make this work. This has to look okay, because there is just a greater risk here.
One of the things that struck me, I was thinking about this when we talked about Esperanza, was the show is really good, especially when you look at everything, is get past the superficial. And, even Dion does that to a degree when he looks at Jonathan, his friend who's in competition with him. He doesn't like Jonathan. Of course, that's why he gets pulled into the office and everything. Yeah. And he makes assumptions about Jonathan himself. And then as the story goes on, we find more about Jonathan's situation. And it's not as simple as we think, what everybody assumes. It's a lot more complicated because life is messy. And, that understanding comes through to Dion as well as to us through some of that revelation.
Yeah, CPS is a threat, is an undercurrent threat throughout the entire series. It's mentioned, I think, in the second episode. And it just mentioned, people just casually mention, that despite we witness Nicole going through these Herculean efforts to keep her son safe and to keep a roof over his head and to provide for him and just to do all the stuff. And despite all of that effort, CPS is still a threat. Or people external, we see the CDC and all this other, people getting involved because it's just not enough. And I thought they just did a really good job of having that threat hanging over her, that despite all we see her go through, it might not be enough.
Yeah, there's still an assumption, she must somehow be negligent. It can't be that the situation is out of anyone's control. It has to be somehow a failing on her part. What parent could do more? What parent could have handled it better? There are parents who would have shipped him off the moment he started doing anything weird. And yet she's not only stayed engaged, but she's tried to find him somebody who can teach him to use his powers, who can, model goodness, who can help get them answers. And she's still, in the end, she's torn away from her child and told, oh no, you can't handle him. You're not, you're not fit to handle this situation. And we know that this is something that happens to real mothers. This is something that happens to real families. And it doesn't take superpowers, and it doesn't take the CDC's involvement for this to happen. So it felt very informative to me, and I hope it was informative to other viewers to see, like, yes, there's a fictional veneer on top of this, but this is something real. The story that it's telling is real. It just has the trappings of a superhero fantasy on top of it.
Yeah.
Jessa, do you have any? You've been a little bit quiet. Did you have some?
No, I was just going to say, absolutely. Nicole, I mean, even from the first episode, I mean, she's gone above and beyond, what is going to bring her own means. I mean, the very first episode, she's going to this school because it is the best option for a school possible. It's not necessarily the best one for him from a racial standpoint. I mean, even his sister doesn't understand, like, why are you going all the way over there for school? Like, he would fit in so much better elsewhere. Like, but that's not the best school for him. But that sort of starts us off on our journey of, like, yeah, not only did I have to do that, but now I had to pull him away from our home. We had to make this whole other life, So he's already going through all these changes, both of them are. But then to also add into the mix this idea that you're already in a very foreign place, there's no sort of creature comfort there. And then having to rebuild everything from scratch to then be thrown into all this other craziness we get with powers.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot. Dion deals with a lot of things that we would normally see in, say, for instance, like a teenage drama.
Yeah.
We see sort of like him having to move to this new place and having to, go to this new school, having to make friends, trying to appeal to the popular crowd, having to deal with racial bias in school administration, all these sorts of things that we would see on a Degrassi or, something teenage. But we see Dion dealing with this at his young age. And I think even that sends a message. I think even that just sort of emphasizes the fact that for Black children, a lot of them don't have that luxury of maintaining that innocence for very long. Like, a lot of them don't have that ability to say, like, oh, I'm just a kid, just, being all willingly free as a child, because they are so forcibly put into real world hardcore situations early on. So I think, in addition to so many things that it says really kind of explicitly about dealing with life as a superpower child, as a Black child, as a superpower Black child, it deals with a lot of stuff sort of like very implicitly, very so like metaphorically as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to say, we haven't talked about the character yet, but his science teacher, I'm so glad that his science teacher is there.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
It is such a remarkable thing. I mean, I am biracial myself. I am one of 5 people of color that went to my school system at the time I went. And so there is a very real situation of not being able to see somebody who is like you. And
Yes.
certainly not as an adult. But not only is this person an adult who looks like him, but also is very, very similar in the fact that he is their science teacher. And so there's a really good correlation between his science teacher and Dion's dad. And that is so incredible. They don't touch on it at all. It's just sort of there. We get an implied comment from the administrator when the science teacher sort of comes to mediate the situation. Like, of course, you would step in, but it's such an important role that I'm kind of glad that it's underplayed and it's not really mentioned, but it is critically important for somebody like Dion. I mean, sure, the guy doesn't have superpowers, but even just to be another person who is a successful person who looks like him that he can relate to and who kind of has his back without sort of pandering to him.
Yeah, I think that was really subtly done. And of course, all of the research shows how beneficial it is to students to be taught by people who look like them. And I also feel the school to me, of course, with the story being set in Atlanta, the whole situation with the school is like kind of a subtle nod to the issue of gentrification within the city of Atlanta. It's like this small little plot line that's kind of woven in with everything else. It's like this is a school in a place where the majority of the people who would normally be living in this neighborhood are going to be primarily Black students. And then you have this little white microcosm school where the gentrifiers' kids go. And I have friends who live in the city of Atlanta, and I know people who send their kids to schools exactly like that one. Oh, the neighborhood schools aren't good enough for my kids. I'm going to send them to this school. So I think for somebody who has lived most of their life in Atlanta, seeing that being told as part of the story, even though it was not a central focus, was also, I think, a really cool thing to be remarked on, because Atlanta is changing. In some ways it's good, but in a lot of ways it's harmful to the people who have lived in Atlanta longest.
That's interesting. I hadn't considered that. I don't live in Atlanta, so I hadn't considered that aspect of it. But I mean, I just the school scenes were some of my favorite, just because I just felt like very real. And, I love the scene where Charlotte's like, "How do kids even deal with the grades? It's so brutal. How does Dion survive this?" That was like so funny. It was just very. So this is a very child-friendly show in the sense that it has a lot of love for the children that it's portraying. All of the children, really. I mean, even Jonathan could have been a very, two-dimensional bully, but then we get to know a little bit about him, and he sort of, becomes that wild child, the wild child adjacent to this little squad that they become. I just thought that was really well written. Just the writing of the show in general is written, but they pay attention to those little scenes and the nuance between the characters, and makes it more fun.
Speaking of Charlotte, I love like her being at the school and sort of seeing how Dion was being treated by the administration, and she just was not having it.
Yeah.
I think that really did a good job firmly establishing her character as a real ally to Dion. If it hadn't already been done, up to that point, I think that definitely solidifies like, yes, she is in this child's corner 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Without like demonizing anybody or, just you go about your business, but like really reestablish, because right at that point we only see, her mom and, the teacher sort of steps in, but her mom is really, his mom is the only one that really sort of deals with it. Like, no, that's not a good situation. And he is wrong. Unfortunately, he's in a position of power. So to see somebody else, and especially somebody that is not a person of color, to then also make that same realization without like, no, that is absolutely wrong, and that's his belief system that's wrong. To have that sort of echoing voice to say, yeah, that's not how the world is supposed to work. I'm so sorry, but we're gonna take care of that. Keep on going. You're good.
Yes.
And all of the characters are so dynamic. Nobody is two-dimensional. I mean, even Pat, who is kind of set up to be sort of like the creeper, oh, but I've been so nice to you kind of guy. Like there's still more depth to him than I normally would have expected in this type of narrative. And even minor characters have so much depth to them. So were there any moments?
I don't know if I bought that Pat has feelings for Nicole. I think that they really did a good job of showing that he has always, since they were children, been in Mark's shadow. And like we were talking about earlier, he never moves past that. He never strikes out on his own. He never tries to flourish with his own strengths. He's always trying to one up his so-called best friend. And it just has made him obviously like really bitter person over the years, which is ridiculous because he's not a bad looking man. He's very intelligent. He has a good job. If he were not a horrible person, he could probably be very successful in the relationship arena as well. And so, he's good with kids, etc. So he has a lot of strength, but he never plays to those. He's always thinking about what other people have that he doesn't. And so I don't know that if I really 100% bought that he really had feelings for her, or if he was just thinking that Nicole was one thing that he was cheated out of.
And he wanted what Mark had.
Yeah.
He wanted the whole package of what Mark had.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can sort of see it both ways. Now that Mark's out of the picture, like, oh, hey, here's prime example of like why you let me step up and sort of be, because they do establish like throughout the series, like you never really liked me, like, but now all of a sudden you want to be around all the time, you want to be part of our family. Like that's a very weird thing to happen. So on one hand, I could sort of buy the like, right, I wanted what Mark had and it just wasn't available for me. But you took away my best friend. So that sort of animosity there. But now that's not here anymore. Like, here's what's built-in family. I've always loved Dion, and here's a way to end. But we also know, now we know that he's the big bad, like, that he really just wants to be close to Dion's power. Where does that sort of flip the switch for him? Because I think Pat, in and of himself, probably would have been just a really nice, innocuous guy. Sure, he would have overstepped some boundaries, but maybe not pushed through them like he does in the series. But knowing that he's had that exposure and he does become the big bad, I think that also sort of exacerbates like the negative parts of his personality and just pushes him too far.
Yeah.
And it puts Nicole in such an awkward situation because he is doing so much with Dion. He does provide so much emotional support for Dion. And, you know, when you're a single mom and there's a guy who's stepping up to help you with the kid, you do sometimes have this sort of sense of being beholden. And you want to be grateful for their help. But at the same time, you don't want to feel like just because somebody's nice to my kid, now I'm obligated to date you.
Exactly.
One of the things I was thinking about was the way that different powers showed up, so the fact that Charlotte, of course, can go invisible, and it seemed like she was the kind of person who wanted to stay in the background, and of course she steps out of that to save Dion in the end. So I think there is some relationship to that, and you can look at that in Pat, in that it's a devourer and wanting this, and it kind of comes through in him too in that aspect.
Yeah, so he is a taker and a user, and he wants everything you have to give him, and then that's still not enough.
And even so,
the difference between the way Charlotte reacts and bonds with Dion versus the way that Charlotte reacts and bonds and does not bond and flees in terror away from Brayden. Like, where do you guys see that going, do you think? Because, he's obviously going to make a return. Brayden's going to be character. He's going to be.
I saw Charlotte's sort of acceptance of Dion and sort of taking on that mantle is almost sort of like a guilty obligation for her. I think if Mark wasn't the one that saved her, if she'd never met him, Dion, he's a cute kid with powers. I feel bad that we've got to deal with this, but I don't think she would have stuck around. I think she would have kind of left him like she left Brayden. But I like how they deal with her, having to walk away from Brayden, that it does become a struggle. Now that we've gotten to know Dion, like, I'm sure he's a great kid, but I just can't do this.
That scene with them in the basement was intense.
Oh, so intense. Children in peril are like the scariest thing to me. Like, you put a child in danger and that's like automatic tears. But I feel like the stakes felt really real throughout the whole series. There was never an assumption that everybody's going to walk away from this okay. And when they do, the ones who do, like, it was surprising to me that everybody actually walked away, well, mostly from what had happened to everybody. So the stakes did feel so genuine. And Marcus, there was something that you had wanted to add, and I think we kind of zoomed past you a little bit.
Oh yeah, talking about sort of like how people's powers sort of reflect their personalities. I think that in addition to just being sort of like this devourer, this user that Pat was, I think we also get some hints of him sort of like hiding it in the shadows, because he was able to more or less like change shape, like adapt to different situations. I think that's very indicative of sort of like how he moved, between the incident and coming with Dion and Nicole. So like really like lurking until the time is right, and then attacking, and then going back to lurking, hiding within the shadows. So I think that it really does kind of do a good job of showing really what how these people's abilities sort of manifest based off their personalities.
So what do you anticipate for the future for season 2? What kind of stories do you think we're gonna get?
I think we're going to see some involvement with Suzanne. I think Suzanne and Biona, they're very morally ambiguous, but I did believe Suzanne when she said that she is not trying to hurt this. I mean, she needs a change of perspective. This is not a specimen. This is a baby. This is a child. But I think in her heart, I don't think Suzanne is malicious the way, for example, that Pat is. I think that in her heart, she does think about the greater good. And we're going to see a little bit more of that develop, I suspect.
I'd like to see them flip around because, we see the evil corporation as such a trope nowadays. It'd be nice and they were building it like that. And it's not like Biona was innocent either. But I would like to see them flip that around. Although I could see Biona and Braden somehow coming together and that kind of being an opposition too.
As much as I don't want to see kids fighting, I'm sort of interested in seeing, some Dion versus Braden in there.
Superpowers.
I mean, who doesn't love a battle royale between people with superpowers? So it looks like I don't know. I've met some pretty tough 7-year-olds that I think my money might be on the 7-year-old. So we've reached the end of our time. So let's go around and you can tell me where we can find you on social media. Yvonne, would you like to lead us off?
You can find me at MovieYM on Twitter, or at Blackxiety on Twitter, BLAXIETY.
Andrea?
I'm at +verb, like PLUSVERB, pretty much everywhere. So I'm on Twitter, Instagram. I mean, I post on Twitter more than anything, but yeah, that's pretty much where you can find me.
Marcus?
Yes, on Twitter and Instagram and really pretty much everywhere. I'm mainly under Elemental, ELEMNETAL_books. You can find, pretty much me just talking about more superhero, especially dealing with younger teenage and child superheroes, all on those pages.
Jessa?
You can search for Good to Be a Geek, and I'm going to show up there. Otherwise, all of my social media is at Sultry McZoe.
Kelly?
And of course, anywhere the track is, you'll find my stuff. So you can always come to our Facebook group. And that's probably one of the first things, of course, Twitter and DragonCon.
And you can find me pretty much on all social media at raving_liberal or at Salt Circle Games. And you can find me on Patreon at patreon.com/chillrpg. All right, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's about raising Dion, so hopefully they get many more seasons.
Yes.
Let's hope. I just want to bring up for those of you who are going to hang around, take a nice dinner break, but at 7:00 tonight, we have our Westworld panel where we're going to be looking at the 3rd season of Westworld and kind of what more bizarre plot lines that they've been trotting out for us. And we're going to look at that on a live stream then. So I guess we will say goodbye then.
Yes.
Bye all.
Bye. Thank you for joining.